Welcome to Ethical Edge Insights, Conversations with ChangeMakers, a space for deeply reflective conversations with those shaping our world. Here we explore their journeys, their greatest challenges, their most significant contributions to date, the contributions they seek to make, and how ethics have shown up along the way. Join us as we uncover the stories that shape our shared future. So, Glain.
Oh, it's actually Glain.
Glain.
Glain like shine. No,
Glain.
that's okay.
That's the second time I've gotten that wrong.
No, it's okay. Everybody does. I would say Glain like shine, not gleam like rain. So think sunshine when you think of me.
So I'm so happy you're here for this chat with me. And I'm just remembering the first time we came in contact and how funny that
Oh
was
my gosh.
and how well
Mortifying.
you did to cover for a certain Australian that was sound
Mhm.
asleep in Tasmania.
Yes.
And you managed to hold that whole call together beautifully. It was
I think when people go
funny.
into fight, flight, or freeze mode, I realize I go into fight mode. I'm like, okay, I'm not going down on this one. So.
Yeah, so that was quite funny, and it's been lovely to stay in touch ever since then. And so here, I'd love for you to tell us more about you, where you began career-wise and to where you are now. What kind of inspired you to be here?
Yeah, so kind of a winding road career, but when I go back, my parents were both teachers. My grandmother had been a teacher. There's a lot of teachers in my family, and from a young age, I always said I want to be a teacher. And then somewhere in about grade 10, I think, well, I know it was grade 10, I had an art teacher who said to me, "Oh, you should be an illustrator." And
Mm.
I just got that in my head. And so I went to become an illustrator. But I think it's funny how life will eventually lead you back to where you're supposed to be when you stop. I always say sometimes mentorship can be very ill-advised, and if it comes to you at a certain vulnerable time in your life, sometimes the advice you're given isn't the advice you should be taking. Well-intentioned, but wasn't certainly the path that I should have been on. So kind of through my 20s, I would say, found my way through a variety of different jobs and then had the opportunity while I was working for a tourism marketing agency, actually in Ottawa, where I had the opportunity to step into training, corporate training. And that just really was the path that started to lead me into the whole space of adult learning, education. I ended up joining a firm that I always say we did the soup to nuts. We were in the leadership and creativity space, and we did classroom training, consulting, assessments, and coaching. And so in 2000, I started hearing about coaching. I didn't know what it was. I thought, I'm a manager. Maybe I should learn how to be a better coach. That was starting to become a bit of a vernacular at that time. So I did some coach training. And I would say, given where I was in my life and my career at that point in time, the coaching was huge. The training was hugely impactful for me because I was being coached as I was going through the training. And so it really kind of helped me further clarify what I was, what I was struggling with in my career. And I remember coming out of that whole experience thinking, oh my gosh, how did I go through as a manager without having a coach? Like, this is ridiculous. How people been not like keeping this from me for years? That was my big revelation, having worked with the coach and been in this coaching program. So that's what sort of started to step me into more of the world of coaching. But I think because my roots had been in traditional classroom training, and I'm a synthesizer, I think I just started seeing the possibilities between all the disciplines and how do we maybe capitalize on the strengths of all kinds of different disciplines to support people. And so that's what kind of ultimately led me after working at that firm for about 8 years. I did a short stint with the Women's Association, and that was really more of a catalyst for me to go out and start what I've been running for the last 18 years is my business, the Roundtable, which is a group and team coaching organization. So that's what led me to today.
I have to say, when as soon as you said that you're a synthesizer, I'm like, hell yes, she is. I've seen that at play on a
Right?
call when we were preparing for the Coaching Ethics Forum
Mm,
conference. And
mm.
I'm just absolutely astounded how you pulled that panel conversation together to bring
Mm.
the topic to life. I mean, that was just quite amazing because all of us were going, well, we've no idea.
Yeah, I think the strength I have for sure is that ability to take things and start to simplify them as well. So how do I pull out? I think my brain thinks in what's the one, two, or three themes that I'm hearing here, and I tend to need to anchor myself into that for sure.
Hmm. How does that show up in your work, in your workshopping work?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, well, like the core of the practice that I started at the Roundtable, I mean, it's really evolved over the last 18 years, but the core was looking at how do we support high potential type A personality leaders in a better way. Because at the time, when I started really getting interested in this, I mean, there was a couple of things happening. One, I was that leader, as a very young managing partner in the firm that I worked for. I was their youngest managing partner. I was sort of the person who'd been tapped on the shoulder to succeed the CEO, the owner of the company. I went through various stages of engagement and burnout and career, disillusionment and all those highs and lows. And when I was coaching, when I did do my coaching certification at the firm, I hadn't really been a practitioner for a few years at that point. I'd sort of stepped more into the management role. And so I started to rebuild sort of a coaching practice while I was there. And my specialty became coaching derailing high potentials. And the more I sort of worked with these people, and I'm Gen X, and these people were mostly Gen X leaders who were director to VP level. And I just started thinking about, what were the options for development? You could go to a 3-day offsite a training company, take a high potential leadership program for 3 days. You could work with a coach one-to-one, or you could go and do sort of these team building activities where you could do trust falls and things like that, and get to know yourself better on some level. But there wasn't anything where I could see, and I knew from my own leadership journey, I think what I felt very fortunate about working at a firm that specialized in leadership development was that I was um, bathing in it every single day. Every single day I was learning something about myself. We did a lot of assessments. I got to sit in tons of classroom training. I got to do a lot of work. And I just started thinking about this whole notion of, leadership development isn't an event, it happens over time. As much as I love, though, one-to-one coaching, the challenge that I started to, really see and identify with was this idea that, you learn leadership by doing. And there's a lot of wisdom that you gain when you go through the pathway that is leadership. And where were the spaces to talk about that? And so I was quite fascinated by my boss. He was in a group called YPO, with Young Presidents Organization. Started looking to a lot of those kind of peer groups that CEOs had at that time. And I remember saying to my boss when I was managing partner, is there a YPO for me? And at that time, there wasn't. There was no sort of 2IC or anything. It was really for entrepreneurs, or it was for CEOs, the top job. And it was sort of this idea of it's lonely at the top. And I was thinking, you know what? It's lonely in the middle on the way to the top too. And I felt like as a young managing partner, where were my peers? Like I really wanted to be able to, talk to people who knew what it was like to go through what I was going through. So that the synthesizing of really what I felt was a gap in the marketplace, and specifically around those leaders that we put a lot of pressure on, that carry a lot of pressure. Type A personality people who I've now been working with for close to 30 years, they're wired a little differently, and it's not always a good thing. Really wired to take on much more responsibility, take much more accountability. And so that's why you see, people burning out or exhibiting stress behaviors that are not necessarily positive, or feeling carrying a lot of internal pressures that really they don't need to carry. So I wanted to kind of create a system and a way that leaders could work through a lot of that, and at the same time also improve their impact, because leadership is it's a responsibility, right? I mean, when you step into it, you're really making an impact on a lot of people's lives, so you have to take that very seriously.
Yeah. And did you end up doing any sketching?
When you say sketching, how do you define sketching?
Well, you were
Oh,
talking
with my Yeah, I am a model drawer for sure. So, and I think I did a lot of, I would say, mind mapping, and then yeah, I had so many models that were around the flow of learning, where and I remember I had one model really early on that was really about because originally I wanted my business to support high potential leaders at various stages of their career. So I kind of had this whole model built around that idea of where were you, what stage were you in, and then what programs would support you at which stage. And of course, I then met a business coach who said to me, "That is way too effing complicated." Nobody's going to know what you're talking about. And I remember leaving that lunch thinking, that guy is such a jerk. I hate him, blah, blah. And then, like most coaching, right? I always say coaching happens in between the coaching sessions. And then I sat and I thought about it and I thought, oh, okay, probably right. And maybe I need to focus my message a little bit more, and so sort of let that. But yeah, I think probably if you went through the archives of the Roundtable folders, you'd probably find, I don't know, hundreds of different models and ways of trying to visually represent complex journeys in simple ways, for sure.
Well, it's nice to see the through line though, from
Mm.
where teachers suggested you head, uh,
Yeah.
and it doesn't get lost along the way, it sort of molds itself and finds its way in there somewhere.
Well, I think it's the thread of creativity, right? Like I think there's a thread of I think for me, like looking at the training and development space and seeing what was there and thinking, okay, we're really siloing disciplines here. We've got training, we've got coaching, we've got mentoring, we've got on the job application assignments, we've got all these, team building. And for me, I mean, when you look at the core program, the first program that we developed, which is called the Roundtable for Leaders, it's all of those things. And
Mhm.
and I often say to learning and development professionals, it's like you can bring all of these concepts together, right? They
Mhm.
don't have to be so siloed. And when you bring them together, you get exponential results. So I think that is probably part of it. Now, I'm not a from the ground up creative person. I see people that are just brilliant thought leaders, and they can just, I think like yourself, Wendy, like just really get into a subject and really, bring some phenomenal thinking to it. For me, where my creativity comes in is to see those things and say, I see what you're trying to do there. But you know what? If we added this or tweak this or this, it's gonna increase the impact. So I'm almost more of an iterative innovator, and that ability to simplify sometimes too, because I think often when people get very deep into their subject matter, they over without realizing it overcomplicate. And I think that's often where I'll come in and sort of simplify. So a lot of the things that we teach in the roundtable are things that are, universal knowledge pieces. But what I've tried to do is sort of bring it into something that's very streamlined and practical, and that a line leader who's got their day job can take that concept and immediately apply it, and then therefore, increase their impact, or increase their satisfaction, or whatever it is that they're trying to work on, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for this new model that I've got out at the
Yeah.
moment, because I've already framed up example questions, so it can be used immediately in a coaching
Mm,
context.
love
Um,
that.
or even, for me, it's not just for coaches, it's for anyone. So they could even be asking it of themselves,
Mm,
in relation to whatever circumstance they find themselves in, and just nut things out from the different spaces that they're in. So yeah, no, I get that. It's important to keep it all practical.
yeah, so true, right?
Yeah. So what would you believe your greatest impact has been, whether it's be professional or in some other space, whether it's recent or history back way back then? What do you think it might be that kind of stands out for you, or even what stands out? There's two questions there. It could be what stands out, what you think might stand out for other people and someone else, and what stands out for you.
Mm. I think if I think about the work that we've done in terms of the way we focus on developing leaders at the Roundtable, I know it's changing. If I'm going to say this now, and remember, I've been at this close to 20 years now. But when I started, this notion of doing short bursts of learning over time, so all of our programs are a year, like 8 months, a year, 18 months, 2 years in length, because you need time to really solidify new behaviors, mindsets. Leadership is an ever evolving journey. It's highly situational. You need
Mhm.
to be really adaptive. And I'm really, I think for the longest time, well, actually, really, I didn't know this when I started the roundtable, but I think one of the things I was really thinking a lot about at some level was this idea of, this lone leader, this lonely at the top. It's lonely. Leadership is lonely, lonely, lonely. And you started seeing things way back in the, mid 2010s that were around the loneliness epidemic, like we're so lonely, we're becoming more and more isolated. Work had become more and more transactional. I wrote an article in the Globe and Mail like years ago now, like I think it was back 2014, 2015, that was titled Why Your Top Talent Wants a Divorce. And it was this notion of um, companies had really moved away from sort of what I would call the paternalistic style of, corporate, where you're going to have a job for life and you're going to be looked after and we're going to have the company picnic and we're going to focus on community, to really like more of this paper for performance. And it's very isolating, kind of like transactional experience. And with other parts of community crumbling, church, neighborhoods, things really changing, I felt like we were, if you mirrored that larger societal piece of individualism and isolation, and you start seeing mental health issues emerging and that type of thing, I really started thinking about how the job that we have in leadership is to create connection. And it's when you have connection, and the other thing that was happening was leadership's just becoming more and more complex. We expect leaders to be able to be great with EQ, but also drive results. And it's this very tall order. And I just thought, we got to get beyond this ego thing and we've got to help leaders lean into each other and support each other and learn from each other. And so that I think is really, that has been the basis of the work we did. I didn't really articulate it that way when I first started with these peer groups. But, the longer we've done this work and the impact that I see when leaders go through our program, the more I see this bigger macro, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of influence and impact that we're having. And so I think that's what I feel like we've done. And 20 years ago, when I would talk to companies about this short burst of learning over time, integrating group coaching and mentoring and on-the-job application and one-to-one coaching, and it was this sort of big smorgasbord kind of program. And they would say to me, "Well, what are the goals? What are the learning objectives of this program?" And I'd say, Well, it kind of depends on the group and it depends on what the focus is of the company. And people couldn't really wrap their head around that because they were in such an old training model. And I'd get a lot of resistance from, well, I don't think our leaders are going to want to commit a whole year to development. Like, I don't know that we'll be able to get our leaders to do that. And I think the really progressive organizations that I started working with back in 2014 or 2011, 2012, that were willing to kind of get behind this idea, um, really, leaned into this idea of leadership not being an event. And then when we saw the transformation that was happening, I have people that I just talked 2 weeks ago to somebody who was in my very first corporate program and is a CMO at one of the big sporting franchises in the US now. And they still talk about the effect that that program had on them. And I think that for me is I mean, that's the, I suppose, personal reward to know that you create these ripples that continue through somebody's career and that you actually, you help those individuals who really are genuinely wanting to do good work. Yeah, do better, and be happier and know how to navigate the pressures and their lives in a different way. So I think those are some of the things that I think the way we've done it has changed. And now that's, like now there's tons of group and peer programs and, those it's become more of a norm. But at the time when I was out there talking about what I wanted to do, there just really wasn't a lot of that kind of work in leadership development. It might have been in other spaces like coaching. Like I think coaching, and I used to look at coaching companies like CTI and how they would do their leadership program, or some of the Hoffman or groups like that that did more of these intensive. But that was a very select group of people that were going through that kind of work. And I thought, how do you take some of the core principles from some of those places and make it more accessible to, a person who's a director of finance in an insurance company who maybe didn't know that they needed this work, but once they got into it, they're like, wow, okay, I didn't know this is what I was getting myself into, but here we go, right?
Yeah, yeah, tapping into their humanity some and feeling
Yes.
safe to do so.
Yeah, yeah, and also like I mean, we're very strengths-based. We're very grounded in a strengths-based philosophy, and we have an assessment partner that does a lot of research on leadership and leadership development. And, over the years, I've seen this to be true. Like, as human beings, we do tend to lean one way or the other. Most people lean either towards quite a strong results orientation or a higher empathy orientation. And, organizations reward results. And so you see a lot of people that get promoted up. And, we work with people who are on that sort of succession path and are being promoted. And, a lot of their opportunities are often around like, well, you need to be more empathetic and you need to bring that side up. But the research shows that most of us don't balance that well. It's great if you do, but most people tend to have a leaning one way or the other. And so, really, in our programs, what we try and do is give people more tools to balance whatever side they sit on. How do we help you balance so that you can meet different leadership challenges in a better way?
You know, I recall a LinkedIn post you wrote some time ago. I can't pinpoint how long ago, but it was, over the last year or two.
Mm,
And you would, because you're CEO of your company, but you had gone away and with the intention of you weren't going to do much work. You were kind of leaving the company in the hands of the people
mm,
who work for you, and you were just astounded that it worked. You were able to let go. They took it on beautifully. What were some of your concerns around that? Because that's a really big, if you were probably already doing that, but when I
mhm,
read the LinkedIn post, it really just stuck with me that, that's a transition that a lot of people cannot necessarily easily make.
mhm, mhm.
Let go. And I think that there's ethical implications around not letting go either.
Oh, yeah.
It's not necessarily the best for anyone. So if you want to talk to that a little bit, your experience around that.
Yeah, I mean, just as a leader, like I think that's the thing. Every day I'm leading, I'm reflecting on my own leadership. I'm like recognizing my own. things I have to work on. So there were sort of two things around that. I had somebody on my team who was, we'd been talking for quite some time about, you know, her interests and what she was interested in doing and taking on more scope around managing of the business. So from a development standpoint for somebody on my team, it was a great opportunity for her to pressure test that for herself, to have 2 months, because I did a 2 month sabbatical, to have 2 months where she was me for 2 months, and what did that feel like for her, right? Because I think, the truth is, it's the Johari window, we all have our blind self, and until you can step into an experience, you can intellectually think you want something. And then you
Mm,
have the experience and it either confirms that, yes, this is what I want to be doing, or you go, oh boy, this is not what I thought it was going to be. I was
mm,
only looking at the sunshine lollipop side of this equation and not the other side, right? And so that was one piece of it. I had somebody that from a developmental standpoint, this is a great opportunity for her. The
mm,
second piece was, I come out of running mid-sized businesses for other entrepreneurs. So when I started the Roundtable, even when I started it and it was just me and a $10 an hour University of Toronto student helping me out, 10 hours a week. I thought like a mid-sized business. I always thought like a seven-figure business. So I had a lot of systems and processes in place with my team. I had regular meeting cadence, reviews, targets, goals, budgets. Every year we have our annual strat plan. People know what we're working towards each year. We review it every month at our monthly ops meeting. So I had a lot of structure in place from the time the business was born. So processes and structures were in place. I had people in place that had been there for, long enough that I knew. I took time off over the summer. It's also one of our quieter periods, right? So there was a number of factors that made it easier. On a personal level, I think, one of the things that being in this space has really allowed me to do is a lot of, I call it navel gazing. There's a lot of inner reflection that you do, and I have a lot of awareness around my strengths and biases and and where it comes from my childhood and my upbringing. And for me, I am very independent. It was always one of the challenges I had working for other people. So even I had always been in leadership roles from the age of about 24. I'd been leading, and I'd made two decisions in the course of my career where I decided I don't want to be a leader anymore. I'm just going to be an individual contributor. And I'd step back. And in both cases, they literally lasted for less than 3 months. Like I got pushed back into leadership, for a variety of reasons in both cases. And so am I know that's part of my DNA, but that individualistic part is actually a big challenge because it makes it very hard for me to rely on other people. It's hard
mm,
for me to trust other people, and it's hard for me to let go. And I take accountability for things that are not my accountability. So I knew in that 2 months, I wanted to push my own comfort zone around that in particular. And that's not just your work, that's your marriage, that's all kinds of relationships, right? So I really took that time to explore that part of me that was and I read a book, so this is going to go in a really interesting direction maybe, but I'd read a book called Attached, which talks about different kinds of attachment approaches. And that book, I just had a really big revelation that I'm somebody with avoidant attachment. It's very difficult for me to lean into trust and intimacy. And I remember when I was doing coaching, CTI has a big thing about like leaning into intimacy and discomfort with people. I I to this day still struggle with that in my coaching practice because I prefer people to be on that beat. I prefer to go, okay, let's go. How are we going to go through this? Come on, we've got this. To sit in discomfort,
mm,
not the easiest thing for me. So I felt like once, like, on my sabbatical, I kind of read that and I realized, oh, this is showing up in my own leadership practice as well. And so, I think it was I think anytime you want to do something like that, like you said, I want to step away from my business, it can't just be because I'm tired and I want a 2 month vacation. It's like, what are the whys behind it?
mhm,
That you're really clear on why you're doing it, because there's going to be points that it's going to potentially be difficult,
Yeah.
right? And it's going to be, something that you're going to have to also be prepared to live with whatever consequences come out of the decisions you made. And when I came back into the business, yeah, I was running and there was lots of good things that had happened, but it was also very evident that my colleague, she really realized, okay, this is not what I want to be doing. And so
Mhm.
that was, great for her to sort of have that understanding and allowed us then to go, okay, so then what do you want to do? But the business itself, there's all kinds of issues that I stepped back into, and it really showed me the cracks in the system, which then, you got to sort of figure out, okay, how do I clean this up? But I think that was really, I learned a lot from that journey, and you also start to see the patterns that you just continue to repeat because of those motivational energies you have. Like I just have a very big motivational energy around independence, and so I think the thing I like personally right now I'm struggling with the business is to find the person who can come in and actually be that right hand. And what I'm really having to lean into is how am I going to let go in order to create space for somebody else to be able to do that, right? So letting go is not easy, and understanding what your reluctances is, I think, part of the work of then being able to choose. In coaching, we always talk so much about what are the choices in front of you. Okay, well, what's the path that you want to choose instead, right?
Mm, mm. And so the challenges of letting go, that's and it's how you do it. So I wonder though, I question about letting to just opening the space and saying, and then finding someone and go, okay, plonk you in. Or is it about growing people up into it? And
Mm,
then that trust builds across time.
mhm,
And then
mhm,
you letting go bit by bit by bit to all of a sudden you
mhm.
go, hey, you want it? You got it.
Yeah, 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 yeah. 100%. Like I think these things are not, it's not like you go, I'm watching a colleague right now who's posted, looks like he's wanting to take a step back in his company. And so he posted, I'm looking to hire somebody and this is going to be a fast track 6 month to the president role. And I'm going to be curious to see how this goes. Um, because I think a lot of people intellectually, like I meet a lot of coaches who say, "Oh, I want to build what you built at the round table," or "I'd love to work and do this work at the round table." Um, it's a weird mix that you need to have to build a coaching business, which is what I have, versus a practice. And um, you need to have some sort of motivation that is frankly an economic one. I don't have a big one myself. I'm really not that driven by commerce, but I do think in a business mindset way, and I do have a very high drive to win. And so, selling and things like that are not things that I think twice about. I really enjoy business development. So, I think you have to be really realistic with yourself as to what's needed and what it's going to be like. And I think a lot of people look at small businesses, especially if they've come out of big ones. I'll often get people who are in human resources and they're going to start a coaching practice or they're interested in joining us. And I think they just don't really realize, the amount of hustle that's required when you're responsible for other people's payroll and paychecks and things like that. And that's a lot of pressure, and it's not for everybody. Um, so yeah, it's finding that right person. You're absolutely right. To me, it's going, for me personally, it's going to be a journey. And yeah, it's not going to be, okay, you're in and now I'm going to be taking a 3 month sabbatical while you run the business this year. It's going to be, I've got kind of a 5 to 10 year timeline in my brain around this. And so, and looking for alternative ways to do it too. I'm sort of curious I'm doing a lot of networking with other folks that have firms my size and sort of thinking, is there another way? Does it have to be a person? Could it be a joint venture? Could it be a alliance? Are there other ways that we could, kind of build something that doesn't have to be the traditional hiring, growing, so those are some of the things that are keeping me up at night these days as a business owner.
So when you're contemplating all of this change that you want to see evolve in time,
Mm,
where what kind of ethical kind of thinking arises in that? Even just on reflection now, if you think about it, you may not co up. It may not show up at the time as going, oh, this is an ethical dilemma. I think people get a bit caught when they start thinking about ethics in that way. It's
mm,
just about, stuff arises and you need to make decisions, and how do you do that? And fundamentally that is ethics. So
mm, mm.
how are you seeing just your decision making come about? And have you got an example?
Yeah, I mean, ethics is such an interesting, I mean, when I first met you and was looking at the work that you've been doing in this space in coaching, it's really interesting and important work. And it actually got me thinking a lot about ethics. Um, and and I think there's some things that you can be very black and white on, we're not going to steal, we're not going to lie, we're not going to, I think, and it can extend, like we've made some decisions about the nature of companies that we choose not to work with because we just, don't agree with their politics or their or the kinds of products that they sell or whatever it might be. So there's things that we do. There's coaching that I won't take on. If this is the last ditch coaching before you fire somebody because you haven't had the courage to have a conversation with the individual, right? And that's not going to be the kind of work that we will do when we get caught in the middle. Clients often want to put you in the middle when you're coaching or
Mm.
or want to get scoop on what's really happening with that group of people. Um, those are all things that I find very black and white and very easy to stand on. I think where, if I think of it back to bringing somebody in to, kind of uh, step into being a successor to me in the business, I know what will be kind of challenging for me, and I don't know if it's so much about an ethical piece or if it's more about, again, I have a bias towards opportunity. I'm always looking for opportunity. I'm very kind of tuned to what's next. I'm very kind of tuned to trends. I could see team coaching coming. When did I get into team coaching? 2010, years ago. I could see that team coaching was going to be a really big thing in the coaching space,
Mm.
and it is now, right? But I could see that coming a long time ago, and I knew why it was going to be coming, and I knew, and we started getting into it very early on as a result. Um, so that's the upside, right? Of
Mhm.
that sort of way I see the world. The downside is that I'm very it's a lot for me to trust other people because I'm looking for opportunities and I'm trying to, you could say game the system or like corporate politics when I was in corporations. I never thought of it that way. I just thought of it as, okay, I'm having the pre-meeting before the meeting. I'm going to get people aligned because I've got this objective and I'm going to get it through. And it was a very kind of natural way for me to think about what you had to do to kind of maneuver through an organization. But the flip side to that is that there's, trust is tricky. And so I think the thing that I'm, in my own mind thinking about is it an, where does the line of trust and ethics cross where you're giving certain information to somebody, but not the full picture because you're not sure where they're at in their journey and whether or not you can fully trust them. And then therefore, and then that doesn't feel ethical to me, right? Like, and so it's
We're
this
talking about relational ethics there. Mhm.
100%. Like, I think that's where it shows up for me a lot is more the relational ethics because I'm afraid of getting, because I think I'm also very trusting. Like, if you tell me I do this, I will believe you
Mhm.
until I don't. And then
Mhm.
when I don't, that's it, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of this black and white. And so, yeah, I think that's for me where ethics come in. And I'm also married to somebody. So you also, it's like, what's your measuring stick in life, right? And so I think, again, I just have a lot of motivational energies that drive towards, um, you know, winning and, kind of I mean, it's helpful in business development for sure. Where's the opportunity? How can I win this sale? How can we compete against these other companies that we're competing against? How can I make sure that, we're really putting our best foot forward? But if I think of my husband, who is not that at all, very sort of what you see is what you get. And
Mhm.
I always think about when we sold our first house, we were selling our first house, and we'd had a leak in our ceiling, and it had been there forever. And when my real estate agent came through, she's like, "Hey, you're gonna have to fix that hole in the ceiling." And I'm like, "Oh, but it's its fourth anniversary coming up next week. Why would we want to do that? It had been there for so long, right?" And then when we were going through the process of then listing the house and everything else, I can't remember. I think it was somebody that we were talking to who was interested in her house, and my husband said to them, "Well, yeah, we had this leak in the ceiling." And I'm like, "Why would you tell them that? Don't tell them that. It's been fixed. You don't need to tell them about something things." So in my mind, I feel like he is far more ethical than I am, because in that moment, my need to win and to get the best price for the house and not to raise any concerns with any potential buyers overcame
Yeah.
telling just a basic fact about, and it's not even that it was really a big deal, but my energy will make it like, why would you say that? Right. So I think it's also like, I think words like integrity and ethics and things like that, it's very interesting to me because I'll hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm very high integrity," or I'm very bound by my ethics. And I think that is such a in the eye of the beholder statement. I mean, where it's black and white, sure, but there's a lot of things, exactly to what you said, that are relational or that are situational. And
Mhm.
who's the yardstick you're measuring yourself against? Because when I sit beside my husband, I jokingly call him Dudley Do Right because he really is. He's just very honest. He's very forthright. He, just says it the way it is. Whereas I'm probably more like, oh, okay, how do I position this to get the least amount of, conflict, or, that, like, I really sort of overthink those things sometimes, right? So
Mhm.
I think it's an interesting question, right?
Yeah, and there's a balance too, because I mean, we don't need to speak to it, but as an example is that perhaps your husband at times actually says stuff just straight off the bat because he's so direct and open, whereas you might actually maybe that wasn't actually something that should have been said.
Oh, 100%. 100%. I mean, that's the beauty of us as human beings, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing, right? The more you start to sit and realize, the way I think about the world is through my biases. My brain is biased. If you have a brain, you have a bias, my friend always says. And we do. And so the more you start to question, like, okay, this feels really important to me, and I can feel myself internally getting very about this.
Mm.
But what's really true about this versus what is almost like an overextension of some lens that I'm putting on this situation. And we've all experienced it. Like, we've all been in meetings where you leave the meeting and your colleague says, "Oh my God, can you believe they said that?" And you're like, "What? I didn't even catch that." Right? Why is that? Because if
Yeah.
we were all the same, then we would all be having the same reaction to it. But no, that's not the way we are as human beings. It's not the way the world works, right? So I think that's why leadership, circling back to like leadership, it's so much at the core is self-understanding and self-awareness. Like,
Mhm.
you have to keep digging into that,
Yeah,
right? In
absolutely.
order to be able to know how you're impacting others.
Absolutely. So, could you give us a story of when you've had to walk through a challenge? And, we'll keep everything confidential. Unless you want to name people, then that's on you. And and how you walked through it and what the outcome was, as detailed or as not, on that as you wish, of course. Um, just I think there's so much to gain from the story.
Mm. I mean, I feel like I could write encyclopedia on challenges. What kind of challenge would be most meaningful, do you think, Wendy, for people that are listening or reading?
I think whatever one that you feel compelled to tell.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many that are jumping into my mind. I think so. Probably I mean, I've faced multiple challenges over the course of my life and career. And, but I think maybe the one that was really such a big one for me was I'd been working at this consultancy. I was very well liked. I really liked the CEO. Um, and, but, structural changes needed to happen. It made sense for the business. I understood that. But couldn't I couldn't see myself staying. So I made the decision to leave and I went to what I thought was my dream job. I really thought it was I've had one of those careers where every job I've ever applied for, I've never been qualified for. And this was one where I read it and I went, I am so qualified for this job. This is my job.
Mhm.
This is my job. It brought together everything I loved, everything I'd worked for through my career. And I was really excited. And I remember interviewing and there was a couple of red flags and I sort of did my due diligence and I'd heard that the owner was very difficult to work for. And the advice I was given was, maybe don't take a full-time job, maybe take a contract.
Oh.
And at that time, my daughter was just under 3. My husband was a stay-at-home dad, and he'd been looking after her full time. And it was a pay cut. It was a big pay cut to go there, actually. I think it was about $80,000. And so, one income. And so it was a really big decision to make that move at that time. But I thought and I can deal with difficult people. Hubris,
Mhm.
right? Like, I know how to I've managed consultants for years, big ego, PhD, MBA consultants, and work with high potentials. I can deal with difficult people. So went into this organization and I think I started on a Monday or on a Tuesday because it was right after, actually, it was this time of year, it was right after the May long weekend here in Canada. And by Friday, I knew I'd made a big mistake. I knew I'd
Mhm.
made a big mistake. But now I'm the income earner. We have a mortgage that now is already tricky because I've taken this big pay cut.
Mhm.
And it was starting to fall apart when I joined, and it was just falling apart more and more. And so by the fall, 2 things happened. When I had left the firm that I'd been running, the CEO had been diagnosed with cancer, and, um, and it was very aggressive. And so that was
Mhm.
in the April. By, October, he passed away,
Mhm.
and it hit me very, very hard. And, another thing that had happened was, a friend of mine had lost her younger brother
Mhm.
to, sepsis. He had flu-like symptoms on Tuesday, and he was dead by Saturday. 2 young children, one was the same age as my daughter. And then so those 2 things happened, and then we were running a huge event, and, this owner and made an announcement of a new program that we were gonna be launching. No consultation with me, and again, I'm independent, and I had said to them when I joined, I said, "Please don't hire me if you don't want me to just run this thing, like, I need a lot of autonomy, like, do not hire me if you don't want to." "Oh, no, no, that's what we need." And I remember standing beside somebody and that I'd been kind of confiding. She was a coach, and, she was in one of my group programs that I'd been running there, and she turned to me, she said, "Oh my gosh, you had a boulder in front of you, now she's just thrown Mount Everest in front of you."
Mhm.
And, we went through the event, and then I think the event was on a Thursday, Friday, I walked in, and I sat down, and I talked to my husband, I said, "I don't think I can do this." But I had no job. I have a high school and college education. I was supposed to be an illustrator, remember, right? And then I was supposed to be a creative advertiser after that. And I I just said to my husband, "I don't think I can do this." And he said, "You need to do your own thing. You've been talking about doing it forever. You need to go and do your own thing." And so I went in the next day and I resigned, and I had in my contract, I had I've been there only 6 months. I had a 2 month sort of, what do you call it, notice period that I was supposed to get. But in any other job, usually they try and get you out of there within 2 weeks. No, not in this situation. I worked my butt off. And I can remember it was on my birthday, was my very last day of employment there. And I can remember literally, I have this vision of me walking down the hallway, firing folders at my staff. Like I've never left like that before, I was like, oh my God, now you need to do this and you need to do that. And and then literally had to go through a whole period of mourning and grief and anger and not knowing what I was doing, and trying to figure out what I could do, and just a really, really big period of turn, and go from an income, six-figure income, to zero overnight.
Mhm.
Overnight. And we had some savings, but we had a mortgage that was all based around my salary. And so it was probably like the most difficult decision, but it was made with me really sitting in my core values. And there were
Mhm.
so many core values working there that were being, I wouldn't even say rubbed, I would say obliterated,
Mm.
that but I think these things come into your life for a reason. I think I can, as painful as that period was, I really now look back at it, and I'm so grateful, because I think I'd wanted to start my own business for years. Like I literally had books and books and books with so many different ideas, and I kind of, never had the guts to do it. And I think sometimes in life, people come into your life and you get your back up against the wall and you have no choice. And you have to move, and you have to, as painful as it is, when there's
Mhm.
no choice and you have to take the leap, and it's like take the leap and assume the net will appear. That was literally the point I got myself to, there. And so I'm great. I mean, like I have zero regrets about it. But it was very difficult knowing that I was putting my family into that position. And my husband at the time was a frontline social worker. So, the income disparity was pretty significant for us. He got a job right away. That wasn't a problem, but it was more we were running into debt every month, and that was difficult. That was very difficult.
Mm. And and yet it propelled you to where?
Yeah. It's what put me where I am today. I
Mm.
mean, I would not be here if that had not happened, right? And if I hadn't had to make it work,
Yeah.
had no choice but to make it work.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm very fortunate. Like I have a partner who, um we were able to work through those things together,
Mm.
and I always say when people ask me, but I go, oh God, don't do what I did. If you can avoid it, don't do it. But you learn about each other too. You sort of lean into, sort of the strengths that you both bring to the marriage, and I think with my daughter being as young as she was, it was just that in some ways it allowed me more time, more flexibility to be with her,
Mm.
at that time. But yeah, I think I would not be sitting with you talking about the round table and the work I'd done if I found that that was my dream job and I was doing it. And, I don't know where I would have ended up, but I don't think it would have been here.
That's an amazing turn of events for the dream job to
Oh,
be where you are now. So,
yeah. I think part of it was, I did model. I learned a lot from that. And I did end up modeling a lot of the round table out. I learned that structure. It was a structure that was unfamiliar to me, a business structure that was unfamiliar to me. So I learned a lot from that, and then sort of, again, synthesized, brought that in, brought other things in, brought that, to kind of create the way the round table works today. But yeah, wouldn't recommend it if you can avoid it.
with all that said, what would you like to think that people would think that your legacy?
Mm. I mean, I would like I would like to think that at the end of the day, the people who've been touched by our programs would say that they know themselves better, that they are clearer on how they can make an impact. I think at the end of the day, that's what we're doing is creating these ripples. I want leaders to feel less alone. I want leaders to feel more supported. I find like our space is there's a lot of leader bashing that happens in our space. Like a lot of people get on the stand of bad leadership, like stop the drama at work and do this and do that. And I think for me, I have a different point of view. Like I lead every day. I lead, and I can tell you it's darn hard. Like it is not easy. And some days you do well, and other days you are not your best self. And let me tell you,
Mm,
when you're somebody who's a type A achievement type person, nobody else needs to beat you up because you are beating yourself up more than anybody else ever could. And so
mm,
for me, I really want to support leaders. I want them to give themselves grace when they're not having a good day, but to learn from it and to grow with it. I think on the group coaching and group mentoring side, I do think the way we do things at the round table, it's a system. It causes rippling change in organization that's sustainable. And I think again, if I compare what I grew up with, which was one-to-one coaching where you could make that kind of impact with the one-to-one person, or training where you were putting people through, these transactional, which, maybe a few people have epiphanies, but, it's not necessarily sustainable learning. I think the way we've approached designing our group programs, the way they work together as a system, the way they support culture, team performance, individual leadership, it's a really collective approach and a systematic approach. I think that's different, and I know it's different because I work with a lot of coaches and consultants who do get under the covers and look at what we do and they go, okay, wait a second, what you do is really different. I go, I need to be a better marketer because I'm not that great, but I do know like the clients that we work with, we've made long lasting impact and difference. And I feel proud of that. I feel proud
yeah.
of that. We're a boutique firm. We don't work with a ton of clients, but the clients we work with, we are true partners and we really care and we go that extra mile and we're there for the long haul. We're not there for a one-time leadership program event. I don't do that kind of work. I want to be
Yeah.
in, I want to understand what are you trying to do with the business? Where are you going? What's the strategy? And how can we help you get there? How can we help leaders, bring their best self and really make that impact that needs to be made both from the people side and the results side. So I'm proud of that work for sure.
So results can be any numerous of things,
Mm,
and it just has me think about, wonder what kind of issues that you find that are arising in the professional space at the moment, that is the thing that we need to be focused more on.
mm. Um, I mean, it's so hard there's so many, right? I think because we work across sectors, so
Mm.
every sector sort of has its nuance. I think one of the I think one of the things that I worry about when we work with leaders in some of these bigger publicly traded companies is just the short-term nature, this like having to hit certain numbers for earnings calls and things like that, and the pressure that puts on. They're not making long range decisions. And I know that as a business owner myself. I mean, sometimes you don't have a good year, you don't have a good quarter, but you're building for the next. And I, as a privately held company, I have the luxury to do that. I can make
Mhm.
different choices based on what I know is going to pay off in the long term. And I think for a lot of publicly traded firms, there's so many agendas at play. There's the agenda of the shareholders, there's the agenda of the board of directors, there's the agenda of, if you've got aging CEOs who are looking to, really secure their own retirement packages or whatever it is that they're trying to secure, that's very different than the mid-career leader who's willing to take more risks and try different things and maybe take a short-term hit to gain a long-term bigger advantage. And so that's a lot of complexity, right? That people are dealing with. So and so what I see happening is I see a lot of people burning out. I see a lot of people that are really great leaders choosing to step out of leadership because they're being asked to do things that are very results focused, even though companies say we care about people. The people side is taking the back seat because of the pressures. Like I'm not saying this to criticize. It's a system that's broken, but that's the output. And so what I see a lot of is you see leaders getting rewarded who, they drive the results for sure, but that short term, they churn a lot of stuff. And I just think, I think there's a lot of stuff that you measure in organizations that's very evident. Did we hit our revenue numbers? Did we hit our sales numbers? I think the stuff that companies brush under the carpet, though, is what's the cost of that turnover? Like if you add it up, because it doesn't feel like real dollars.
Mhm.
Sometimes it doesn't feel like real dollars. Or I think it's fascinating that right now mental health in the workplace is such a thing. And I always joke, my husband's a psychotherapist, and I always kind of joke that sometimes we have the same clients, right? The companies that send people to coaching with me are the same people that are having, people in therapy because
Yeah.
they're under so much pressure
Mhm.
that they can't sustain it. It's not sustainable, right? And
Mhm.
and I mean, that's kind of that model. Then, there's other sectors where it's not that pressure. Sometimes they're too nice and they're putting their companies at risk because there's such a culture of nice and kindness that the balance is, again, it's all about the balance. If our research partner would say less than 6% of leaders balance results in people well. So with less than 60% doing that, most are leaning one way or the other. So that becomes the piece that I just find it's the results are, yeah, they're tricky, and they're really tricky in publicly traded companies, I think, for leaders to keep maintaining that level of profitability or performance when some of them are in places where markets are drastically changing,
Mhm.
drastically changing. What do you do about that?
And where does humanity fit in all that as well?
Mm, mhm. Absolutely. I
So
think
we're,
oh,
yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that we're, almost at the end of our chat.
Mm.
And I was going to ask you, what are some of the things, a few thoughts you might want to leave us with? And then I've got one surprise question that's just arisen to me.
Well, I was thinking earlier when you were I was just reflecting also on ethics and things like that. I think one of the things that I am thinking about a lot is AI these days, and it's particularly AI in the coaching space. And I was at a conference recently where, from the stage, one of the presenters said that there was research, and I don't remember where this research came from. I'm kind of skeptical when I hear things from the stage that are like research from blah, 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 because when you start digging into it, you find it's not actually very
Mm,
validated. But anyway, here was the thing. They said that a survey had shown that most people are more comfortable talking to an AI coach than a human coach because they don't feel judged. And
mhm,
so I was having this conversation with my husband about this because, therapy and coaching are very parallel,
mhm,
in the way we do it. And I think, in our firm, we're talking a lot about, one of the challenges with the traditional coaching model. We don't do a lot of one-on-one coaching, but we do it. And I think about I always have a coach on the go in one form or another. Either in a peer group or I'm working with a one-on-one coach. And I mean, one of the challenges is, and it's the same challenge in therapy, is that you have your schedule. So you're going to meet your coach once a week, or once every 2 weeks, or once every 3 weeks, or once every 4 weeks. But we know life doesn't work on a schedule. And
mhm,
so how do you get support in between? So we're having these conversations about, the kind of the on-demand coaching and do we need to be creating these sort of coach avatars that, we train and could be put into our program as a support to the human coach, right?
mm,
Um, but there's also a part of me that goes, okay, just because you can do something, should you? And what's the and I'm always concerned at the infancy of any sort. I mean, AI is just exploding, but it's, I don't, I think a lot about like, okay, early adopter, where is this going? How's this going to be used? And so I think those are, kind of almost to circle back to the ethical things to think about. But, right now, what's kind of I'm thinking about a lot is that space, and what does this mean for coaching? I remember Peter Hawkins, I'm being in a program with him many years ago, and he said at that time, because AI coaches were already a thing back then. I think this was back in like, I want to say like 2015 or 16 or something. I was in a program with him, and he said, like if all you've got is powerful questions as a coach, you're going to be in trouble because AI can ask powerful questions and it's getting better and better at doing it. And yeah, I think there's just a lot of things for me that are coming up around these conversations and those questions in our space, and how does this all start to fit together to support people, right? Like if at the end of the day you want to help, which I think is really what drives a lot of us into this profession, we want to help others. Um, yeah, how does technology play a role in that?
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know the name of the book. I can't remember it, but I've actually just finished co-authoring a chapter on the use of AI and technologies in the one-to-one human coaching,
Mm.
some of the ethics around that. So it's the combination of bringing it in and also what you need to be mindful of. So I can't remember the name of the book, and we've only just submitted it for editing.
Oh,
So
well, I want to hear the title once, yeah, once that comes out. I
yeah,
think it's really
yeah.
important for all of us to read.
Mm. So my surprise question, which has just arisen, and I'm being a little bit cheeky by asking this, so you can decline it. Feel free to decline it. I'm just wondering, can you verbalize how you would illustrate this conversation? Isn't that an unusual question? But it really,
Very unusual question. How would I illustrate this conversation? I feel like okay, what's the immediate visual that came up to me was a pathway through a forest. And I feel like there's just been these little detours and pathways and little, stop for me personally, stopping to smell the roses and take in the view and being able to kind of meander out to a wide open space that is just full of color. So I think that's as I think about visually, what do I see? That's this sort of meandering pathways that ultimately get us to a beautiful space. So
I love it. Thank you for indulging me. I just thought, man, I just want to know what she thinks now at the other end from an illustrative perspective. Can she switch into it that quickly?
welcome to my brain. So there you go.
But that's also, I think, where your synthesizing comes in, if we can finish there. That's one of your
Mm.
big strengths that I'm aware of. Thank you so much for
No,
spending
you're
time
welcome.
with me.